Hey guys, Tarke here with another PoE discussion video, this time all around difficulty, and huge shout out to Alok because this guy basically completely inspired this video. So what is this video about? I'll just completely give like my mission statement, then we'll read this comment and then we'll kind of bounce around a bit. So, difficulty and enjoyment of PoE is very difficult and very complex. So, enjoyment of PoE is hugely affected by game knowledge, build strength, the kinds of builds you play, your play style, and most importantly, a lot of people would say play time. As a result, it's incredibly difficult to make an experience that satisfies the ever-diverse Path of Exile player base over the duration of the league. What's fun for me, as someone who has 7 years of experience and the ability to play 8 hours a day, is very different to someone who's only played for a league or two and can play 8 hours a week. So, what inspired this video? So in my most recent video, where I talk about Path of Exile in 2020 and what I hope to see in 2021, I talk a little bit about how the Sirus with Conquerors of the Atlas, I find very enjoyable for the first Sirus cycle, and then I find it very tedious because I have to keep repeating the same thing over and over again. This guy then talks about how he has a very different problem because he says that he's just not a very experienced player. He gets stuck in yellow maps, and he gets frustrated that he never even gets to see Sirus in the first place. So I kind of ask him, what is it that makes you feel like you get stuck in yellows? And he has a very well-written reply. But he mostly says this at the end, which I really appreciate. The cycle of increasing his difficulty through Awakening 8 would be scaffolding for me, but is boring to you because you're significantly better at the game than I am. The middle ground, I think, would be valuable to chase, would be something that would allow me to take my time with that scaffolding, so progressing slowly bit by bit, but allow you to skip or accelerate it so that you're not bored. But I don't know fully what that looks like. And I think that's something that's really interesting because everyone has the same difficulty. You have to progress through the exact same systems. There's not much in PoE that lets you skip through systems. And most difficulty in video games tends to be very binary. A good example is I recently started playing Horizon Zero Dawn, and that is a very binary difficulty system. So the way that that works is it has story, easy, normal, hard, very hard, and ultra hard. These are all the different difficulty modes it has. I generally like a hard experience, so I started on the hardest setting. That makes sense, right? Just multiplying all the numbers actually wasn't a very fun experience. So for ultra hard, the damage taken, you take 200% damage, and you deal 70% damage. Now, I've actually played Horizon Zero Dawn before, and I really enjoyed it the first time round. And for my first, 3 or so hours trying to play it on Ultra Hard, I had a horrible time with it. And the reasoning being is it actually broke the combat system. So the way that the combat works, very briefly in this game, is you use a bow and arrow. You've got to very carefully line up your shots. You're fighting giant, very mobile dinosaurs, which have very small vulnerability windows. If you hit the vulnerability windows, yay, you do loads of damage. If you miss, you do 0 damage. With the first enemies you fight in that game, they have weak points. If you hit the weak point, 1 shot, 1 kill, and you're fighting 5 to 7 of them at once. So when I first played this game, I played it on hard mode. I still did enough damage that if I hit the weak point, I got the 1-shot kill. So I'd have these very manic, scrambly combats where I've got 5 to 7 enemies, and I'm having to land my shots carefully to get the kill, or I do no damage at all. But playing on ultra hard, suddenly hitting the sweet point wasn't enough. You then had to hit that sweet point 2 to 3 times, and that completely killed the flow of the combat, and I had very little fun. So I ended up turning the difficulty down to hard, and I ended up having fun again. Just making stuff have more or less life isn't the way to go. Bring this back to Path of Exile. What makes Uber Elder such a great fight isn't the fact that it has more life than normal Elder. The thing which makes Uber Elder so much fun is you now have a second boss that you need to manage, because you have Uber Elder and you have Shaper. I want more systems like that, where the core dynamics change rather than just a life change. Now, another difficulty system worth mentioning, and it's a difficulty system I praise whenever I can, is the way they handled the difficulty in The Last of Us 2. So I don't know if PoE would ever have this kind of difficulty system, but very briefly, if anyone hasn't played it, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sliders. A slider for player damage, enemies, allies, stealth, and resources. And you can change these sliders completely independent of one another. So if you're someone who really enjoys managing limited ammo, and you like that kind of Resident Evil kind of experience, you can have it so that very few resources populate the game world. But you might really enjoy that limited resource stuff, but really don't like the stealth mechanics. So you can slide the stealth mechanics to be very forgiving. You might want your allies, when you have allies on missions, to be helpful in combat, so you make their damage turn up. Or you can make them to have no strength in combat, so it's you doing all the stuff, and you can slide them down. You can make the enemies very aggressive and do a lot of damage, or you can make them very dumb, and you can balance everything accordingly. And this means that everyone who plays this game has the ability to enjoy the game to the fullest potential, because they are entirely in control of it. I really like systems like this, but having something like this is quite difficult in Path of Exile because it has a trade-based economy, and this is probably too many sliders. I don't think we'll ever really have that. That would be my ideal scenario if Path of Exile was just a solo player ARPG. So going back into when I think PoE has had engaging difficulty systems, Metamorph. I think Metamorph was a very good league for that, because Metamorph changed the difficulty axis completely. So usually I think that Path of Exile has a very two-dimensional difficulty. Most bosses have set difficulty. This is just how much life it has. The only real exceptions would be something like Cortex or something like All, where there'll be random mods applied to it. But again, that's mostly random. You don't control what map mods are on All. It's just, oh, he randomly happened to have this mod. Most stuff is very set. The bosses have exactly this much damage, this much life. And then the only real control you have is stuff like map mods or like putting Delirium on and stuff like that. So fairly a two-dimensional experience. What Metamorph did is, instead of just having map mods, it then added the Metamorph mechanic. So now you had to consider what monsters are you putting into the Metamorph, because different monsters have different attacks. So that makes the Metamorph boss you're fighting very difficult. What special Metamorph abilities are going into it, because different abilities change how you fight the thing. And then you're balancing this directly to what rewards you're after. So do you want the currency rewards? But the currency reward comes with the volley attack, which is actually really punishing with the map mods you've got on. You still need to balance all of these things, and it just made the choices a lot more interesting. Now, when it comes back to the access of difficulty, and why I think this is such a important topic in Path of Exile, is I often find myself walking away from characters, getting bored of characters, not because I feel like my characters hit a brick wall, but because I've gotten bored of the content. So, bringing up this very professional looking graph, we're just going to map out what I think the difficulty curve of Path of Exile is for me at this point. So, let's just say this is a start of league experience. Act 1, start of league, is actually surprisingly difficult, especially if you've got a league mechanic, which has some rippy content. So I'd say that Act 1 is actually kind of between like a medium and a hard difficulty. Now, once you've gotten a 3-link and you've kind of got stuff going on, the difficulty kind of trickles down, and then it trickles back up as you get up to, you know, Act 3, Act 4. Act 5 is actually quite difficult. It then will trickle down if you've got no resistances, sure, but it will trickle down a bit, and it has a few peaks here and there, but it's generally a fairly kind of static sort of thing. And then it creeps up again as you get to Act 10. That can be kind of scary again with the monsters. And then it trickles all the way down for early white maps. Early white maps are a complete joke, and you start getting more powerful, you start getting more levels, you start getting your ascendancies and stuff. And then as you get into yellows, it starts to creep up a bit. As you get into reds, it definitely starts to get more into the hard again. But at this point, you've gotten a 6-link, and you've started to get some pretty good gear, and you're still already in early reds. The difficulty goes all the way back down. And the difficulty doesn't really get up again until you've gotten all your Awakener stuff set up, and you're then doing Awaken 8, and you're doing the big boy Sirus, and then you're maybe starting to add Delirious and Zana map mods on. Then it starts to actually get really difficult again. And then it kind of just keeps scaling up the more you invest into your maps. Now, I most enjoy Path of Exile at these peaks. This is where I enjoy PoE, and I enjoy it here. The problem I have is with this section. This section for me becomes really tedious, and a lot of Path of Exile is in this section. So for me, I want this section to be a lot harder. However, a lot of people struggle with those sections. So just blanket making everything harder doesn't work, because then you're icing out other players. So this is why I think we need more dynamic control of difficulty. Another really good example of this, and the most obvious one that everyone can relate to at some point, is Delve. Delve is a joke. Delve becomes incredibly easy until it isn't, because it's just infinitely scaling. So Delve kind of just like is nothing, 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 and then it starts creeping up, and it will creep up at different points based on your build and, you know, what level you're at. But for most, it gets difficult around like Delve 300-ish, and then it kind of travels, and then because it's infinitely scaling, you then get into the everything just one-shots you thing. So if you want to push deep Delve, you either play some kind of build which doesn't take any damage because you're cheesing certain immunities, or you play a 1 HP build and you do dodge stuff and you just don't get hit forehead. And then the difficulty becomes really weird, but you get my point. This aspect isn't interesting. The only time it starts to get interesting is when you're in this part, when it's like you're getting into that medium, into the hard. That's when PoE is most interesting for me. So I want to try and capture more of this experience if possible, while not just making the game blanket harder for the people who currently find the game already challenging enough, or in Alex's case, too challenging. So I was thinking about this whole Sirus thing, and I'm like, okay, well, is there a solution to this? Like, what could we do? And I came back to what you were saying about something where he gets that slow progression system where he gets to engage with the endgame content, he gets to see the endgame content and practice the endgame content, but someone who's experienced with it gets to skip it. And I'm like, okay, well, what if you had a system kind of like this? So maybe you had like uber Sirus cycles. So instead of having to do Sirus multiple times, what if you could elect early on to choose to do a super hard version, like a uber version, where all of the conquerors are significantly harder, but you're gaining more watchstones. So you only ever actually had to kill Sirus once, but because the fights are so much harder and so much more arduous, it's still taking you quite a long period of time to do it. Like, you're not just instantly, oh, I've got all my watchstones. Now, the difference being, and where the time gating would come in, is rather than the time being in doing Sirus over and over and over again, the time would come into, I now need to gear my character to be strong enough to kill this really hard conqueror, to do this super hard Drox, to do this super hard Sirus. Like, that's where the fun is for the people who want that level of challenge. So they're still getting the same experience, but without repetition. And they're reaching the exact same endpoint, because it's not a case of they're getting better stuff, they're reaching the exact same endpoint, it's the same rewards, it's just they're getting a more consistent difficulty curve. Meanwhile, you could have the opposite system for someone like this, who gets stuck in like the yellows, where maybe they get much easier conquerors, or easier Siruses, but they gain less watchstones. So they get to engage with the content sooner, but they don't progress as far. So to get all of their watchstones, they'd have to do more Sirus rotations, but they're still getting to regularly engage with bosses, they're still getting regular access to challenging content, and they're getting more regular progression systems. Because there are really good boss fights in PoE. There are really interesting fights in there, which is really good. But by just having them gated behind these arbitrary grinds, you lose out on all of that. All is a really good example, just being, it's a random thing you get at some point in Delve. All's a really cool fight. How many alls do you see a league? A lot of people will say 0. And a lot of it goes back to this whole Delve thing, where they'd really enjoy doing the content here, if they could jump to that content here, but they don't want to do this rubbish in the middle. And yeah, my ideal Path of Exile would be a system where we kind of have more of a Last of Us style, super player-controlled difficulty sliding, but I don't think we'll ever really get to that level of it. So I think having just more things where the player can choose some level of control to limit some of the tedium would be the ideal situation. More consistently challenging content, let the players decide where that challenge is. And yeah, if you have any ARPGs that had a difficulty system you entirely, like, particularly enjoyed, let me know. If you think that actually Path of Exile difficulty is perfect, it doesn't need any changes, then let me know. And again, it isn't as simple as just doing private leagues, because again, you're then gating difficulty behind a paywall, which I don't like. And the private league options are very limited because they're generally just like resistances, life, defense. But anyway, I'm Tarke. Have a good day. Bye-bye.